clock on the wall at 7 o'clock. That's when we're scheduled to begin. So before we start, before I introduce our speaker, I want to announce that this program tonight, which is called Growing Up Franco-American, and the Old Berwick Historical Society in South Berwick has a program coming up on October 25th at 7:30 at the Berwick Academy Art Center, featuring Peter Micio, a renowned New England historian who's been connected with historic New England. He'll be lecturing on Franco-American, the architectural legacy of Franco-Americans. And more specifically, he'll be talking about a fellow named Plant, whose father emigrated to Maine from Quebec, and ended up, his son ended up building a large factory in a big estate. And then he's also going to be talking about a fellow named Lucien Omar Geoffrion, who lived in Portsmouth from about 1930 to 1972. And he'll be describing the impact of these builders and their architecture that was mostly in the French-American tradition. That ties in nicely with our program tonight, and then on November 14th, this society has our annual meeting at the House of Hope, and we'll be featuring a group, a trio from South Berwick called La Madeleine, and they sing French songs,
Yes.
from Edith Piaf to French-Canadian folk songs. So there's a great connection there of Franco-American culture that all comes up within 1 month. So we hope you'll be able to turn out for these. Et now, écoutez-moi s'il vous plaît. C'est ma plaisir bienvenue à Berwick Public Bibliothèque et Berwick Society. That's about enough. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Berwick Public Library, and who is hosting us, and we're presenting this program from the Berwick Historical Society. I'd like to thank the librarian, Sharon Kelly. She always goes over the extra mile to give us a chance to have our meetings here and stay open a little bit longer than she ordinarily would. So we appreciate that, and we thank you very much. Without too much further ado, I just want to introduce you to our speaker tonight from Sanford, and she'll tell you a little bit about herself, growing up here in Maine, and the tradition in which she did that. So please welcome Lorraine Missour.
Thank you, Don. Bonsoir. Good evening. I get a call about once every 5 years tonight. And I'm so glad that the room is this size. And I feel fine. It's just that it's not always possible to speak without coughing. If I start coughing, I have a candy there, and just talk within yourselves, and I'll be back with you. But thank you, Berwick Historical Society, especially in the person of Don Young. I have been doing these book events for about a year since my book is published, And I have yet to meet anyone who is nicer and who works harder for the success of this evening than Don Young. You are really terrific, very dedicated. And I note that both your board president and vice president have Franco-American names, which is great. And thank you, everyone, for being here. Boy, when I saw the weather about 4:30, 5 o'clock in Sanford, was it as wild here as it was? I said, this is not good. So this is delightful, this library. Coming to a library makes me think of so often a French author, Marcel Proust, who talked about privileged moments. There are things that you see once in a while in life as an adult, and wow, this brings back the memory of a whole array of things that happened. And that happens with libraries. I see a library, and I see Goodall Library in Sanford when I was a kid. Marcel Proust called these privileged moments, des moments privilégiés, privileged moments. And always makes me think of when I see a fern plant, Dawn. Think of my mummy, because she lived in Lewiston on Pleasant Street, which had this wonderful hill. I'm 6 years old, and I am sliding. She's babysitting me, and I am sliding up that hill and down that hill. And I have to go to the bathroom, but oh, one more slide. You've been there. You know what I'm talking about. One more slide. One more slide. Well, finally, I said I have to go in to my grandmother's. It was time for lunch. And so I dutifully went upstairs and I washed my hands before lunch, and I came downstairs and had this soup. And Al, I apologize, you heard this last week. Al's a student of mine, senior college. If you haven't done senior college, you have to look into it. It's wonderful. So after I had washed my hands, I went downstairs and we started to eat that French soup. Cubes of beef, tomatoes, some pasta, and whatever was left over in the fridge. And all of a sudden, the ceiling started to leak, honest to God, because I had forgotten to turn the faucet off upstairs. So whenever I see a fern, I think of my meme and that privileged, not so privileged moment about the ceiling that leaked. A book signing event. My book came out in April of 2017. And so I've never done stuff like this. I've done a lot of teaching, senior college teaching. By profession, I was an administrator for the University of Maine. But a book event, so I Google. You Google. When you don't know something, you Google. So Google said that a book event, tongue-in-cheek, was an event where 2 people come and 1 people buys a book. So, that was all right with me. So, and to stand here and to say that I wrote a book is as unbelievable as to say I lost 10 pounds. I never thought that I would have the discipline to sit down and write a 161-page book. So I am just a pilgrim going through life trying to get my weight to be what it says on my driver's license. It ain't going to happen. At 84 years old, it's not going to happen. I'm guessing that you or your parents will identify with the book because you don't have to be Franco-American to do that. Although there are many, in this room I met many Franco-Americans. How many Franco-Americans? Oh, mon Dieu. Yeah. So we have so many Franco-Americans in this wonderful area. And this should not be some constipated lecture. Chime in, interrupt if I'm not making sense or if you have something to add to it. You will only make it a better event, and Dawn will be happy. I know that. So here is what I'd like to, my lesson plan for tonight, if you will. I'm not going to speak especially about the content of the book, because you can do that in your living room with an adult beverage. I'm going to speak around the book. And then I'll read a very short excerpt from the book. And then I will answer any questions you may have, as long as they are not mathematical in nature. And then finally, if anybody would like to purchase a book, I'd be happy to sign the book to you or to someone for a gift. So, Sean Sullivan was the editor of the Sanford News. He now writes for the York County Co-Star. And when he interviewed me, I had just had the book published, he said, why did you write the book? Why did I write the book? Well, it was already written. I had gone around southern New Hampshire and southern Maine for probably 5 or 6 years, tethered to a PowerPoint. Pretty much a paraphrase of the book, but without a book. So the idea now was to take that and to put it on paper. Now, doesn't that sound easy? Well, it isn't easy, and this is why it isn't easy. Recall when you were in high school or you were in college and you had to write a book. Now, you couldn't just write, ask not, as I always say, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for you. I didn't make that up. So I have to give attribution for that. Remember those darling footnotes in that bibliography. So when it was time to take these lectures, if you will, and put them down on a piece of paper, because you then become very vulnerable, perhaps legally so. I had been saying, you know, Jean-Pierre said this and Louise said that. Well, I had to go back and make sure that I had my sources correct and that I would not be sued. I have a friend, Carl Johnson, in Sanford, who writes books, but he writes books about the Red Sox. And he sells tons of books. He has titles like From Beer to Beards, Pappy and the Kids, the Bathroom Red Sox book. So Carl sells so many books. He goes to Kennebunkport in the summer. He takes a milk pail with him. He inverts it, sits in front of a store, and the people from Massachusetts buy his books, you know. But it was his wife on the phone one time. She had heard me speak. And she said, you know, you really ought to put that on paper. So I did. So that was how it began. Why did I write it? I wrote it for 2 reasons at first, and then there came to me a 3rd reason. The first reason was to document the bravery of our grandparents. Now, why do I say they were brave? In their decision to leave an agrarian way of life, the garden, you eat what you grow, and to come from Quebec to the States in our mills to earn a predictable paycheck. Wow. But still very, very brave. About 400 miles in my case. They were living an agrarian way of life that is manual labor, basically traveling to the mechanical age in the States. We're talking about 1912. LL Bean established. Fenway Park, I think.
Titanic sunk.
Titanic, thank you. Yes. So that was great. They would have a predictable paycheck, whether there was a cold snap or not, but still brave. The Industrial Revolution had happened in 1850, and by this time has come to New England. There was power of fast-running water. We have manufacturers such as the Muskeg Mills in Manchester, the Cochico Mills in Dover, Bates in Lewiston, Goodall Sanford in Sanford, Pepperell Mills in Biddeford. So it was a win-win situation. It was wonderful for them, although it was brave, it was wonderful. And their work ethic was incredible. So the mill owners welcomed them with open arms. Another reason our grandparents left Quebec was to evade the English government in Canada after the Battle of the Plains of Abraham, les Plaines d'Abraham. They were not treated very well. So when you see, and they have long memories, so when you see that registration plate, especially during the summer, it says Quebec, yes, je me souviens, I remember. And it's even more powerful in French because French is a reflexive language. Je me souviens means I remember to myself. And that's what that's all about. They were brave. A second reason I wrote the book, a second reason why I write they were brave, they were peasants. They were peasants. When I hear about people that I meet, oh, my grandmother went to Radcliffe, or the University of New Hampshire, you know, I think of my grandparents. They never went to school at all. They were peasants. They had no formal education, lots of common sense. Both my grandmothers read the French newspaper to their husbands every night. And in all my research, I could never find out how they learned to read, but they did. They didn't know the English language. ESL for them, English is a second language for them. The reason they could get those jobs was that repetitive work. They're in the mill and they're doing the same thing all the time. So once they learn to do a job, they can have a 48 hours, I think, at first, but they would get a job because explained once, it was good enough. So, and they were so poor, you know. You can wax about frugality and minimalism and how wonderful it is to be Henry David Thoreau, but money is an economic weapon, and we all need it. And they were very, very poor people, and they had large families. And if you look in your thesaurus, for Franco-American, you see the Roman Catholic Church there. And I'm there every Sunday. But, you know, birth control, So my grandparents, my grandmother, 9 children and pregnant coming across the border. And they were British citizens. They had never lived under a democracy. I saw their birth certificates attest to that. So that was the first reason I wrote the book, because of their braveness. They were so brave to do what they did. The second reason I wrote the book was to compare and contrast what life was like once they settled here. Hence the title of the book, Growing Up Franco-American with No Black Patent Leather Shoes. Why no black patent leather shoes? They sinfully reflect up. They do. And here I am.
Have a velvet collar?
Oh, yes, my mother made that. Yes, yes.
I had a coat.
Yeah, it was beige, and I have the St. Paul required hat to go to Mass, and that was beige with brown buttons, and that's my father's Hudson Terraplane car. I forgot what year it was. Worked for the IRS. He said if you can't beat them, you join them. And I think I have patent leather shoes on, but don't tell anybody. So, how was my upbringing different from, say, a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant in this room? Well, first of all, the food. And I promise not to talk about boudin.
About what?
Boudin? Boudin?
Yep.
Boudin? Blood pudding. Blood pudding. Wonderful. Cooked with bacon and onions. Very, very nice. You've seen it at Hannaford's, I think. So the food was different. You know, we certainly not Weight Watchers. I mean, we celebrated Canadian Thanksgiving last Monday, and we had tortillas because about Thanksgiving, we started eating those pork pies. Salt pork. I remember my dad in the morning getting up and taking the grillade de laure. We'd take salt pork and put it on toast. And they metabolized it. You know, they worked very hard. Croutons, you know that? Crepes, of course you know. Tbhs. Well, tbhs was whatever was left over on Thursday night, because it's going to be Friday tomorrow and you got to eat fish. So, we were different with our religion. Again, I repeat, smudge, Roman Catholicism, Franco-American. Most of us, Roman Catholics. Because of our language. Speak French in the house, my father said. At first, it was like a root canal. Speaking French in the house. Dans la maison, on parle français. They knew very well that when you're 6 years old and you go out to school, which there was no kindergarten when I was a kid, 6 years old, you went to first grade. You learn very soon to speak English. And so, although it was like a root canal many years ago, my French has allowed me to travel all over the world. If you know French and you know English, some of you are nodding, you're good. You're really good. The music, the fiddle, the accordion, the spoons, the bones, the jaw harps, the jigs, very, very different. And values, mostly like ours. But oddly enough, Antioch University had a study, and the results indicated that Franco-Americans ranked or prioritized values in the following order. Not family first, work first. Family, benevolence, self-direction. And that was certainly true in my family. Speak up. I'm trying to speak up and not cough. So, lazy and dirty ranked very low in our families. So to summarize, I wrote it to document our grandparents' bravery, to document the old world culture they cherished and transmitted to us. And as I said, the book is generational. I mean, your parents, all of you are younger than I am. I know that. But your parents lived this book, and you don't have to be Franco-American to identify with it. And then I had this thought, wow, you know, politically speaking, is this book going to come off, because we're talking about immigration, especially last year, well, this year too, I guess. And is this something that's this book going to come off as Lorraine Massur's manual? This is how you immigrate to the United States. You know, you pay your taxes, you learn the language. That was never my intent. I had been peddling this 5 or 6 years before. And it's a memoir. It is not a political, has no political inclinations. And then I later reasoned, I told you I had 2 reasons at first to write the book, and then a third one came to me. And it took me a while to realize it. It's a nudge to Franco-Americans to take pride in their rich heritage. You are correct. I do not speak Parisian English, French, and you do not speak London English. Same deal, you know. So be a proud Franco-American. You know, here is my thesis. Dawn, are you listening? All right. We didn't lose our culture. We joyfully forfeited it for the American dream. And most of us would say it was a great bargain. Right, Joyce?
I would.
The answer is yes.
My uncle and my father would tell us all the time that that heritage was left behind when they left Canada. You're an American now, so you're going to speak English, and you're going to assimilate into what Americans do.
Well, and we did.
Which we did, but we still held the French culture.
That's right. Yeah. And I think we should be proud of that. You know, that's exactly, you've been reading my notes?
No, but I read your book. It's one.
Oh, all right. It's understood that, you know, the Franco culture would eventually become a little bit diluted, but assimilation need not be repudiation, you know. Often I'll say to somebody, yesterday there was a gentleman who came to, he makes house calls, fix my computer. So I said, is your last name French or Hispanic? He said French. And so what's the next question? Do you speak? Un petit peu. You know, and then he went on and told me all the swear words that his mother used to say. So without seeming a victim, you know, there is a reason for the denial. There is still prejudice associated with being of French extraction. Tell you a story. It has some age to it. I was at the university, and let me see how long I've been there. Been there 12 years. Said to the dean, could I take sabbatical? And sabbatical you could take in 7 years, but I had, what do you want to do? I'd love to go down to Portland to one of the TV stations, which will remain anonymous because of this story. And I like creative things. I just like to hang around the station and just see what they do in the news and et cetera, et cetera. Well, I, you know, naively thought that everything that I saw on my TV would be at that station in Portland. Wrong. What's at the Portland station is news and other short stuff, you know, Bill Green, is it? Stuff like that. But anyways, we'd take off in the morning, and we'd take off in a van. And there was the videographer was the driver. And I'm going to say names, but it wasn't these names, just so we know who we're talking about. In the passenger seat is either Cindy Williams or Kim Block, the reporter. And I'd be in the back and driving along, and we're going to a shoot now. You know, we have a director that has said, there's a problem, oh darn, I can't remember, Belfast with chickens. Somebody's abusing chickens. Is that familiar to any of you? The answer is yes. So we're going to this shoot in Belfast. So we're driving along, and when we get to Auburn, Maine, we get off the turnpike, and we're perpendicular to Route 4. And so now we start driving into Lewiston. But we're still in Auburn. Oh, well. I hear one of them say to the other, look at the color. This is a true story. Look at the color of these houses. Whew, how awful. Well, what do you expect? You know, these French people, and they go on and on and on. Lorraine's in the back seat. Lorraine Dutil-Massure is in the back seat. Well, what do you expect? You can only sleep with your sister so long, and then it comes out of your pores and your jeans. It was really disgusting, and it was really stupid. All of a sudden, I think it was he said, wait a minute. We don't know what Lorraine is, not who, what Lorraine is. And I would be paraphrasing, I will paraphrase and say, yes, I am Lorraine Dutil-Massure. I was born in Lewiston, and these are my people. And I like to think that we would not condemn a whole ethnicity the way that you both have right now. So, apologies all around. And I will tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that when we got to the shoot, I mean, you never saw an intern better treated than Lorraine Dutil-Massure. How do you like this shot? Do you think this will work? So there is a reason for the denial, and because it often happens, you know, and it breaks my heart because French is, for one thing, such a beautiful language. German is guttural, and most of our English words come from German, the German. But the French is mellifluous. I know that some of you Franco-Americans will remember Midnight Mass, and it said, we say, oh, holy night. We say, minuit, chrétien, midnight, Christians. Quand l'homme Dieu, when the man God, descendit, came down, jusqu'à nous. Jusqu'à is one word. It would take you 20 words to say that in English, right? It's a gorgeous, gorgeous language. So the other thing is, if somebody says, well, pardon my French, which is usually followed by a swear word, do not take that. That's not French. That's not French. So be proud to be Franco-American. I was asked by a reporter, Tammy Wells, who is still with the Journal-Tribune, what my favorite story is in the book. And Al, I apologize. My favorite story is a fun story about my mom. My mom went to the 5th grade. My father to the 10th grade. They read the Portland Press Herald from cover to cover every single day. I wish my college students would do that. I wish, you know, I agree with the guy that said, too many people vote. Some of them don't know what the hell they're voting for. Anyhow, they were readers. And my mother didn't always pronounce words the way, the English words the way they should be pronounced. For example, she might have said Worcester instead of Worcester. She might have said Saco instead of Saco. So we were at table one night, and my dad, who had a shoe store, came home and started to tell us about the attractive woman that had come to his store that day. And we all listened. And then we went into the second paragraph about the attractive woman that had come to his store that day. And when he started the third paragraph about the woman who had come attractive to his store that day, she turned to me and she said, you know, your father thinks he's a Don Joanne. The same lady that told my 16-year-old Chris, you know, Meme don't believe in that premental sex. And you ladies know what I'm talking about. I know you do. I was 40, they were staunch Democrats. I was 42 years old before I realized that Hoover's first name was not Muzi. The loveliest story in the book, again, is about my mom and her siblings going to court as adults to become citizens. Her father said to her, if you do not become a citizen, and there's a war between Canada and the United States, Lorraine's going to stay with me, you're going to get shipped out to Canada. Canada would have to have a defense budget first, right, Dawn? So with great trepidation, they studied in what was for them a second language. And as they would bump into each other, you know, who's the Secretary of State? How many, why 13 stripes in the flag, et cetera, et cetera. Came the happy day they finally went to court. And I think this is a beautiful story. My mom never forgot the judge's eloquence. Your native country, Canada, is like your parents. Your new country, the United States of America, is like your spouse. When you marry, you don't stop caring about your parents. So should it be with you. Always honor in your own way your native country, yet always being devoted and true to the United States of America. I think that's a beautiful story. Lastly, if you've ever written anything for publication, once it leaves your desk, you'll say, Jeekes crow, I wish I had mentioned such and such. I wish I had told them about the Congressional Medal of Honor that I received, etc., etc. These are all painful, but the most painful afterthoughts are about, I wish I hadn't written that. One poignant example involves my dad and the way he described one of my brothers. On their 60th wedding anniversary, I had the prescience to sit my parents down and interview them. It's in the book. They were wonderful. I mean, you know, how many children, how many siblings, I didn't use siblings probably, but how many brothers and sisters did you have? Oh, 9. Name them. Duck, 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 duck. What time did school start? 7:45. We walked both ways uphill. They were wonderful about it. But when mentioning one of my brothers, my dad, in his mind, working is physical. Working is, I have examples here that I can't. Real work is shoveling or welding or plumbing. It's not especially book learning. So when mentioning one of my brothers, my dad described him as one preferring books to say work. Instead, he said he was not as ambitious as the others were. And I knew what he meant, but I should have asterisked that or something. My brother's penchant, his proclivity, included very little physical work. He wasn't that kind of a guy. Loved books, loved research, loved intellectual pursuit. And, you know, the proof of the pudding is he was hardly a lazy lad. He eventually became dean of the law school at Notre Dame. So that takes a lot of work. But it's not this kind of work, you know. So let me just say to even out that my dad, in reality, was very, very proud of his book son. Never have I been accused of humility, but I am happy about the buzz around these communities in New Hampshire and in Maine about my little book. Sometimes I think it's better received than had I written the Iliad. I have had a lot of people identify with it. Because growing up Franco-American is a lot about us. And I have learned after several of these books events that Franco-Americans and those who befriend us, like here, are really like family. So I share with you the pride we have in our legacy and in these wonderful communities, New England. And if this little book of 161 pages has eclipsed some of the negativity out there, especially these days of our time, and this little book shines a bright light on the goodness and the integrity of how we grew to be and who we really are in our core, then I rejoice in its success. Thank you. Now I'll read to you, very short time. Are you leaving?
No.
Okay.
I was trying to find money to pay for the book.
Oh, all right. Again, this is, the book is divided into sections. For example, à la maison, at home. Joyce, help me. À l'hôtel de ville, what does that mean? City Hall, Hôtel de Ville. À l'ouvrage. À l'église. You could. À l'école. No, school. All right. Not at all a political statement, but rather an efficient delineation, usually stated in French. We called all non-French people Americans. C'est des Américains. I don't care if you came from Czechoslovakia or Hungary or Poland. C'est des Américains. And we were French, of course. We called ourselves Canadians. Now people call themselves French. I don't call myself French. I am a Franco-American. If somebody is here 100 years from Mexico and says I'm Mexican, that offends me. And I don't want to offend anybody by saying I'm French. I'm not French. My derivation, I come from Canada. My parents did, my mother. I'm first generation American, but I'm Franco-American because that American is important to me. We continued to call ourselves Canadians until time gradually evolved to French. Aware that we children would quickly learn English when we interacted with the outside, our parents required always and ever that we speak French in the house. Although this edict felt like capital punishment, Dawn, at the time, especially since I did not learn to speak English until I entered the first grade at age 6, today I can gratefully claim that my English and French have enriched my life, have facilitated travel all over the world, and my French never impaired my English. My French helped my English. Just a minute. Oh, turn the camera off. As I consider my life at home as a child, I conclude it was rather typical Franco upbringing, probably like yours, actually. Were we poor? I don't know. If so, we didn't know it. Enough to eat? Absolutely. And my mother was a master chef at transforming and combining random leftovers, just like your mother, I bet. Delicious entrees, you know, a little bit of sauce, a little bit of sauce, an épice, spices, and the like. We were required by our parents to eat evenly on our plate, from our plate. Each portion on our plate, along with bread and butter, given democratic attention. You could not eat all your meat first or all your potatoes first. True to most families then, breakfast, déjeuner, contrary to petit larousse, was consumed immediately upon arising. Lunch was called dîner. Dinner. Dîner is lunch. As close to noon sharp as possible, depending on schedules, and supper was called souper at a punctual, usually 5:30, after we'd come home from school and my dad from work. Well do I remember my dad's usual breakfast, said that, juice, 2 eggs, thin slices of salt pork on toast. Hearty meals carried over from his youth and his days on my grandfather's farm, then metabolized in part because of hard physical labor. Especially during the Depression, on Sundays my mom would cook a piece of meat, beef or pork favored, usually pork, for our main meal, which was usually eaten at noon, complemented by potatoes and variegated veggies. My mom magically reintroduced each meal's remnant meat at night with the same piece of meat with different species, until Thursday, when it would mercifully and totally be consumed. How so? Whatever was left in the fridge was artistically transferred to a baking dish. You ladies all know what I'm talking about. Strategically covered with pie crust and baked at 350 degrees until done. And it was good. Observing meatless Fridays was infinitely more appealing to me because that was usually mackerel, haddock, or salmon with whipped potatoes and a couple of vegetables, than the beans and Frank's Saturday fare. It seems we were served tons of vegetables, including onions. Onions. And to this day, I cannot cook string beans without an onion on it, you know, especially in the pressure cooker. Oh, mon Dieu, c'est bon. Delicious, usually warm baked desserts. I mean, there was no restaurants really, and there was a bakery, but my mother baked. Often included fruit, but I don't remember much still life fruit, you know, like you see on a table. I remember promising myself as a child that I would someday grow a watermelon garden. Souper, too, was a hearty meal that might be further categorized as a meeting. That's when my parents discussed their day and inquired about ours. The previous sentence is code for what did you learn in school today? These were not always festive Ozzie and Harriet events, believe me. Although my mom sometimes catered to some of our finickinism, a favorite line of hers was, if we put up our nose at some planned or table dish, if it's good enough for your father who earns it, it's good enough for you. As I wrote above, pork roast was a favorite. Sandwiches with pork butt meat saturated with delicious homemade ketchup were assembled between thick white bread slices the night before and kept in the fridge until we fetched them the next morning. Now we're going to school or work. Exposed to room temperature all morning long, and no kill dates on this stuff. They were consumed with gusto at lunch, and nobody died. Other frequent non-Weight Watchers foods we enjoyed, I mentioned before. By the way, my dad lived to be 90 and my mom to 94. In short, this whole business of the culinary can be summed up with the adjective frugal. And waste, after all these years, is still not part of that vocabulary, and maybe you share that with me, especially food. According to our parents, it wasn't that there were children starving in China. The reason given here was that no matter if we were eating boudin, blood pudding, God had thus given us our daily bread. Most of our clothing were products of a collaborative feat. Mom and I used to go to the Salvation Army Friday night and carefully select used garments she would later launder or have cleaned. Then she would unstitch them and press them flat to yield yardage. Following this, my dad would gingerly trace a pattern. Some patterns were home-drawn, and I know that you remember the Simplicity patterns or the McCall's patterns. A prospective piece of apparel on that cloth, which my mom would later stitch together. And voila, a coat or a dress, or even a brim hat. My mother made everything except socks and brim hats. My dad used to remark that there were only 3 food items they were required to outsource. You know how we go to the store of Hannaford and we have like this? On the farm, there were only 3 items that they had to outsource. I never forgot that. Tea, flour, sugar. Likewise, when it came to clothing in our own immediate family, the only purchased items were underwear, some stockings, and of course shoes. I want to hear some of your stories. Joyce, tell me a story.
Well, actually, I have a question, if you don't mind a question.
If it's not math, you're all right.
Well, it came up over the weekend. My husband and I went to Sturbridge Village with the JC Senate, and no one at the table knew how to play spoons except me. And so we started trying to figure out, why do I know how to play spoons when no one else at the table did? And I said, well, I grew up playing spoons with my relatives on holidays. We always had someone who could play a guitar, or someone who played the harmonica, or someone who played piano.
That's right.
We were lucky enough to be around a piano. And I wonder if was that something you grew up with? Is that French Canadian?
Yes. They used to have
I came up with maybe that it was Southern, like a Cajun, but I said Cajun goes back to Canada.
In my family, they had this like a pickup orchestra. My father played the piano, somebody'd play the guitar, somebody'd have the drums and the spoons. And sir, you look like you have something to add to my story.
My dad plays the spoons.
Yeah.
And her brothers all play instruments, and he joins in no matter what's going on for music.
My father played the harmonica.
Harmonica. I love harmonica. Yes, sir.
My father played the harmonica and the piano, and he was mostly deaf.
Wow. Not like Beethoven, but Beethoven was deaf and composed all that beautiful music. Yeah, sometimes I think I can almost identify Franco-American people because they're like the Western European, the Spanish, the Italian. We love fun and we love music, and and we can be grouchy, Dawn. We can be, but that is Joyce. I think that's a thread in our DNA. Yes.
Well, and I thought it was a lot of endearing
grandmothers calling their children, okay? And my grandmother used to call me, "Krot damu."
Do you want to, do you,
But that was an endearing,
it was an endearing.
you know, if you translate that literally in English,
Doesn't sound
it
good.
don't sound good at all.
Well, I'm going to translate it with your permission. It was like little turd of love. That's what it is.
You're right about the language though, Lorraine, when you were saying earlier about you can't, in English it doesn't sound the same, like men you Christian when you were talking about, it just, you, in English it takes way more words than it does to say
Oh,
some
yeah.
things in French.
French is, well, I'm prejudiced, so let's forget about it. It is, it's a gorgeous language, it really is. Spanish is very pretty too, but of course I'm partial to my Franco-Americans, especially Edith Piaf. I mean, oh gosh, some of her, I have a CD that I picked up in Paris. She really does it well, you know. Da 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 da, below, da da. Tell us more.
Were practical jokes a big part of your growing up?
Oh my
They
God.
were huge in our family, to the point where when you got married, you picked the most able-bodied men to be in the wedding party because that was your defense team. And they fought the rest of the congregation. There were tires hung in telephone poles, drives
Oh.
stolen. There were houses that were completely filled with newspaper
Yeah,
when they were on honeymoon.
yeah, yeah.
Or all the honeymoon clothing stolen. There was my meme was the instigator of most of this. When my aunt was small, she had 8 kids, and she was the third in line. And she didn't get up one morning, she slept in, and my dad got home from all the work that he was doing around the house, and it had been a big snowstorm, and my meme was outraged that she was still in bed, so she sent my dad up. Well, my dad went up and came back down, he was outraged, so my meme went up, picked her up out of the bed, big farm woman, walked to Dad, handed her to my dad, and my dad dropped her over the rail. One story down into the big snowbank in the driveway.
I believe it. I believe it. Oh yeah, they love their jokes, and they love to tell jokes. I remember my great uncle telling the guy he was a show off, and in French it's even funnier. He was such a show off. His buddy said, "You know, you really ought to stop showing off." So they went to a dance, and I guess a girl said to the show off guy, "You know, did you have a good harvest? Avez-vous eu des bonnes récoltes cette année? Did you have a good harvest?" So the show off guy said, "Oh, a harvest. We had to build a barn 700 feet long," and his buddy kicked him, and 2 feet wide. Spaghetti barn. But it was a good upbringing. It was it was a great time. We say Al Carter is in my senior college class. He's valedictorian for coming tonight. I mean, he's going to get A+. But we talk about what we're studying right now is the music of the 50s and the 60s. And we talk about the 50s, we say, well, what's the difference between the culture, And I know some of you are too young probably to remember it as well as I do. But it was, the war was over with. There was a little bit of money. You didn't lock your car. You might lock your house. And it was such a great time. It was so comfortable and so safe. That's what I want, safe. And you didn't have to worry about a lot of things that our kids have to worry about today, which is sad. I mean, I remember the big sin, the Winston cigarette, when we were 15, a Winston cigarette, mon Dieu, going to hell in a basket. But it was a wonderful time, and whether you had, as a teacher, first of all, born in this country that everybody wants to come to, and born of parents like we had. And I don't care if your teacher was Mrs. Brown or the one Sister Mary Adolph, like I had. They agreed. They were all the same value system. You know, and if the teacher disagreed, she probably, or your parent, probably went behind your back and you never knew about it. And it was such a wonderful time to grow up, the 50s. So safe, so comfortable. Other stories?
Can I ask another question?
You just did.
I mean, another besides.
Another one. All right.
I grew up in Biddeford.
Yep.
My surname is Tbhs, so
Oui.
Franco American.
Do you know Joyce?
Everybody I knew went to school at Saint Andre,
Oui.
Saint Joseph, or Saint Marie.
Oui.
All right, they were the local parochial schools.
Yes.
Is that typical of grown-up Franco American?
Well, that's what happened to all of us, you know, because there are no vocations and there is nobody going to work for $12 a month like the nuns did. So they had to regionalize these schools. In Sanford, we had St. Ignatius, which I went to, and Holy Family, and help me, Notre Dame. And now we have St. Therese de Lisieux. I guess it's still St. Thomas School. So
But they
because
were public schools back then too. And why is it the Franco Americans chose to go to the parochial schools over the public?
It
I
was
th-
not just the French, it was the Irish also went to Catholic schools.
Yep.
Anybody that could afford it went to the Catholic schools.
I can tell you that the priests used to get up there in the pulpit and say, upon pain of going to hell, you send your kids to Catholic school. Does that answer your question, Monsieur St. Pierre? St.
Is his name St. Pierre too?
Some of those
Yeah.
schools,
Oh, mine is too.
St. Pierre? St. Pierre?
Yeah.
Are you related?
I don't know.
We'll find out.
some of those schools were taught in French. When I was 10 or 11, I had a couple of friends from Somersworth, and they were taught in French at school, and they spoke French at home, and they had a hard time with English.
That happened to me. All morning long was French. I'm talking about mathematics taught in French and geography. Yep.
That's what I went to school in Waterville, Winslow area, Catholic from kindergarten up through high school. And it was French in the morning, English in the
Yeah.
afternoon, right up. And I was thinking, I know the Mexican population is very Catholic. What happened to the Catholic Church? They took care of the Canadian immigrants, but they're not taking care of the Mexican people. I mean, we were totally educated, and my brother will say that when he had to switch over to public high school, they knew these kids from St. John's were college material.
Yeah.
Because of the discipline and everything that they had learned. And why isn't that happening on the south border, like it did all across the Canadian border? And in
Well, what's
northern
happening in
US?
the Catholic churches today?
Yeah, there are no teachers left. The nuns, they're all retiring, and
Yeah.
Well, we've lost a generation or so of people who go to church.
right.
More than one generation, probably two, once we get.
Yes, yeah,
yeah.
because the first generation that stopped going to church is not teaching their children. And in my
That's my
family,
case.
6 kids, only one married Catholic.
Yep.
I married a Jew from New York.
Well,
I brought up Catholic.
yeah.
It just got to the point where it doesn't really matter because we kind of faded away from Sunday Mass, and it's too bad because everything you're talking about, I remember. I mean, I remember eating potato sandwiches, which I used to
Oh, yeah.
love.
Yeah, that's
Potato
true.
pie, potato pancakes.
So I'm wondering, you're talking about growing up Catholic in Catholic schools, which I did. One of the things that happened somewhere around 6th, 7th, or 8th grade is that I had Sacred Heart brothers, and I also had nuns in the elementary schools. But they would always bring up becoming a priest or a brother or a nun.
Yeah.
Or none.
And it was part of almost the curriculum.
Right.
They would, they would have like an open house, and show all the kids the different orders you could join and the specialties of each one. And was that the same throughout the entire, because you seem to have touched base with many French communities in the States. Was that the same throughout, or was it only in Lewis and Auburn?
Oh, no. It was throughout. Yeah, we had the same, first of all, the Catholic,
Vacation week as well. what it was.
Vocation week, right, it was almost like no other vocation. I think they still talk about vocations, I mean, but you know, I feel so sad that I've never said this in public before, that the Roman Catholic Church is in such a demise the way it is. It's so hurtful. And you know, I'll be there Sunday, not because if I'm not there, I'm going to go to hell or something. It's 1 hour where I reflect on my life and just think about things. But it's very sad where we are. And, you know, she's right. You know, there's nobody there. Is there anybody under 40 in your church? 'Cause it's,
Yes. No.
Yes?
In our church, yes.
Yeah?
Some new people, but we're Episcopalian.
Oh, Episcopalian.
I
Yeah.
go to the Catholic Church. There's no young people in
No.
Our Lady of Peace?
Lady of the Angels. The Lady of Peace is gone.
Did you want to say something?
I'll live here.
Did you want to say something to the group? Hello? Did you want to say something to the group about people under 40 going to church?
No, no, Brian just asked me what someone else had asked, and what I heard was, is there anyone under 40?
At your church.
at
Yeah.
your church?
Yeah.
And they're saying yes.
They are?
Not church anyway, yeah.
What church is that? Is it a Catholic church?
Yeah.
Catholic church?
Lady
And,
of the Angels in South Village.
yeah. Well, that's great.
St.
And-
John's over in Somersworth, they got a hell of a thing going on.
They do?
Oh, my God, yes.
And
What do you mean a hell of a thing?
Good thing.
Oh, good thing, okay.
just to get back to your question, you know, the Catholic Church today is maligned because they have a lot to do with immigration. And I'm not saying they educate the people, but they really, Catholic Charities does a lot for the immigration people.
But they're not taking care of them when they go.
Well,
Yeah, they want to fill their church. That's why.
Right, same.
probably right.
You
Probably
know
right.
what did it for me was in high school, the ecumenical council, when we lost a lot of the tradition.
Of course.
Vatican II.
Yep.
Me too.
And you know what's happening now in Winslow, my hometown, St. John the Baptist Parish? They've turned the altar back
Oh, really?
its original position.
Is it Latin?
No.
No,
but
still.
there is a Latin mass in Oakland, Maine. My brother's telling me all this, and he hasn't
Yeah.
been to church in ages. But we both really liked that old tradition. I liked the habits that the nuns wore. You know, it was, maybe it's just because it just my memories, but it changed, and it still doesn't have the spirituality that you need. You know, it's all business, and it's just not the same.
I identify a lot with what you're saying. I happen to understand every word of that Latin. I certainly understand why they went to the vernacular, but oh, the Latin was so, sursum corda, lift up your heart.
Yeah, there was only one English mass growing up, and it was like the high mass at 11 o'clock.
Oh, yeah.
It was all French and Latin.
Yep.
I have to say, I for one, I'm happy to see the habits go. They fill me with fear. If you've ever seen the Blues Brothers movie with the nun that couldn't face, that's the experience that I had in Catholic school. There was a lot of martial punishment, and I was the #1 target. So when I left the nuns, I was real happy.
Said they were called the Sisters of Mercy. but
Right.
They had no mercy.
There was no mercy.
You must have been a juvenile delinquent.
I must have been, but
John?
If I could move this into a more secular comment, perhaps. My wife will tell you every time we go to Portland, going up 95, and I cross the river, always call it the Saco River.
Oh, do you?
When you get on the other side of the Saco River, you're in Biddeford. And so are you familiar with the big Franco-American celebration there in the summer, La Kermesse?
La Kermesse, yes, yes.
And so you could sell quite a few books over there.
I know it, I could. I should do that.
Oh.
Yeah, it's been kind of dwindling, but it's still alive and well. Yeah, it's getting,
Over the bridge, he says Seiko, and I say Saco.
well, because he's related to my mother, Seiko. Time, okay, time. Can I just send 2 more minutes? Because I can't, I apologize, so much fun. I never end my sessions without singing Alouette. And no matter where I go, I don't care the ethnicity. Now, if you don't know, an Alouette is a lark. And what you're saying to the lark is, I'm going to pluck you because you woke me up too early this morning. So, I'm feeling strong now in the lung. Alouette, gentille alouette, alouette, je te plumerai la taille, et la taille, alouette, oh, alouette, gentille alouette, alouette, je te plumerai les yeux, et les yeux, et la taille, alouette, oh, alouette, gentille alouette, alouette, je te plumerai le nez, et le nez, et les yeux, et la taille, alouette, ah! Alouette, gentille alouette, alouette, je te plumerai. Thank you. God bless.
Lorraine, we have refreshments, and Lorraine has books for sale, and she'll be happy to sign one.
What first name?
Joanne.
Joanne St. Pierre?
Yeah, J-O-I-N.